past. We're going to be talking about population and ethics. So if you have the floor, you have 1 hour, and if you don't mind, we can ask you during the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Very much appreciated. It's nice to be back. So this is joint work with Susumu Kato and Kohei Kamaga, my co-authors in Tokyo. And for me, that's going back to an old topic, trip down memory lane. You may not know this, or you very likely you do not know this, but my PhD thesis was on population ethics. And after that, I spent about 15 years at least working with my friends Charles Blackley and David Donaldson from UBC on a reasonably comprehensive project on how to integrate variable population issues into welfare assessments. Now, in this project with Susumu and Kohei, we're revisiting one issue that has appeared in the literature in the past, but hasn't been analyzed very comprehensively, as we find, and that's the issue of allowing for non-comparabilities. And typically what we want to do in welfare analysis, or in general in social evaluation, we want to compare states of the world and say something about which one would be more desirable than another. And then typically the generic process is you want to come up with an objective, social objective, look at your constraints, and you try to do the best you can. Good old constraint optimization. Now in population ethics, comparisons that involve different populations of different compositions, different sizes, can be a very complex issue, and the literature is full of impossibilities. So one way around this is to be a bit more modest and say, drop completeness, say you cannot make all the comparisons you want, but at least retain transitivity. That can be weakened too to some extent, but for the purposes of today's talk, we'll stick with transitivity. So the question then is, can we come up with some way of a ranking of possible states of affairs from a social point of view that we think reflects ethical judgments underlying this ranking in an acceptable way. Of course, the way we do this is, like always, we impose properties or axioms. Now what we do in this paper is we come up with a class of rules to make variable population assessments that are based on thresholds. This is not a new technique either, because it's been quite common. It's just been quite common in individual decision theory for quite some time, and we try to apply it in the context of population programs. The approach we follow is welfarist in the sense that the social ranking we establish is determined by people's well-being. And when I say well-being, I mean lifetime well-being, because if you don't do that, if you do have a per-period consideration, this can lead to quite counterintuitive results, because you may end up declaring someone's life to be undesirable simply because they're going through a rough patch. So the idea is to look at your expectation of a person's lifetime well-being and use this as your fundamental input to make these judgments. Now coming back to work that I've done earlier, particularly with Chuck Blackley and David Donaldson, we had one proposal, which is now 30 years old, I guess, yeah, pretty much, where we look at quasi-orderings as an intersection. We say, well, if we look at a parameter, instead of looking at what might be good for one parameter value, we look at the whole interval of parameter values, and if all the principles within this intersection agree, then we say, okay, something is better than something else, or at least as good as something else, like actually better. And that generates something that's transitive, but not complete. Again, the method we use with thresholds, as we will see, is more general, considerably more general, and contains my old stuff with Chuck and David as special cases. Throughout this talk, I might have to switch back and forth between two versions of we. One is my old we with Blackley and Donaldson, and the other is my new we with Susumu and Kohei. I'll try to, like BBD we is Blackley, Boosert, Donaldson, and BCK is the current we. All right, so the basic setup is we want to find a ranking of possible states of affairs, and we do it in terms of people's well-being. And when I say well-being, I mean just we call it utility. So we individualize lifetime utility or lifetime well-being. all good on the screen? Yeah, well, actually, no, not all. Okay, oh well. Okay, just listen closely, And us. Okay, this is our basic piece of information, our basic ingredient. And because we allow population to vary, the domain that we're interested in is not just n-dimensional space. We have a fixed number of individuals n, but we allow the population size to vary. So our domain is what we call omega, and this is the union. Overall possible population sizes, positive integers, finite of course, Rn. So this is the kind of objects, this is the set of objects we want to rank, right? We might want to rank a situation where there are 10 billion people alive. We want to compare this to a situation where there are 9.5 billion people. Again, everything is in terms of lifetime well-being. That's our interpretation. If not, you run into trouble. And we have and all these utilities, the utility vectors that we have contain comprehensive descriptions of the state of the world. That is, these are utilities that take into account everything that may be of importance to an individual. So in addition to consumption, this could contain information on having satisfying relationships, being of good health, being happy. And again, our notion of utility as a measure of lifetime well-being is very comprehensive. Because if it is not, it's much more questionable to use the welfarist approach. But if it is, it's actually a very compelling reasons to do that. I won't go into that in detail right now, but for the time being, let's just leave it at that. This is welfarist and unashamedly so. So what we want to come up with is a relation.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Is there a finite number of periods, or?
There are no periods explicitly. But yes, there will be actually the number of people. All lifetimes are finite. Basically, you can look at you can do this in an explicitly intertemporal framework. Because we only look at lifetime utilities, we can forget about the underlying intertemporal formulation, because what matters at the end is only someone's aggregated lifetime well-being, and these aggregates will always involve finite lifetime. Nobody lives forever.
Okay, and because you have different populations, is it different cohorts, or is it different countries?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. A person is a person. This is fully anonymous. Where you're born, when you live, how long you live, doesn't matter. What matters is how many kicks you get in your life. Basically, how well off you are, what is your lifetime well-being. That's all that matters. So in that sense, it's fully anonymous. All right? Okay. So R is a relation defined by this domain. Are you flashing something here? Every time people use tech that goes beyond the board, something goes wrong. I don't know.
I was trying to share.
I feel vindicated. Well, I see you want to do
But
it.
we should have done that.
But anyway, it didn't work.
But nice try. It's appreciated. All right, so this is our basic object, a relation that allows us to make comparisons of states of affairs with possibly different populations. And again, standard examples for variable population problems are problems that involve, one example we like is foreign aid that you give to developing countries, and if you give this aid in terms of education rather than consumption, that typically has a dramatic effect on population growth, because people are educated, then they typically don't end up having large families that they have a hard time feeding, for example. But I also want to make clear, because sometimes people have a slight misconception that this is not about ending lives, right? Once you're born, when somebody is born, this person is alive. This person has full moral standing. Ending someone's life does not change population size. It changes the length of life of this person, but it does not change population size. So there's a clear asymmetry here. Because we've had this, I remember this in the past, people thought, yeah, when do you decide when somebody's life should be terminated? And say, no, absolutely not. You can talk about this, but it's not a variable population issue. The variable population issue comes into play when you ask, should people be brought into me? All right, so this is a quasi-ordering. And so quasi-ordering is transitive, it doesn't have to be complete. And I use P for its anti-symmetric component, I for its symmetric component, and N for non-comparability, like standard notation. Now, one proposal that we, as in BBD, we made almost 30 years ago is what we call critical band utilitarianism. That goes back to an earlier suggestion by Blackaby and Donaldson. Let me start with that. That's an ordering. So that's whether, because that is a full-blown way of being able to compare everything you like. This is what's called critical level. Utilitarianism. And critical level utilitarianism basically is utilitarian in the sense that it worries about the sum of utilities. The critical level is a parameter that is used to extend these comparisons across different dimensions, across different population sizes. So the way this works is as follows. Again, this is Blackaby and Donaldson in 1984. So if you take any two population sizes, N and M, any n-dimensional utility vector U, and any m-dimensional utility vector V, we say that U is at least as good as V, if and only if the sum of the utility gains over what we call a critical level alpha, that's a constant, in U is greater than or equal to the corresponding sum for the utility vector V, and of course the number of components here might be different. If N and M are the same, the alpha washes out and you have straight utilitarianism. So alpha is a parameter, and we call it the critical level. Basically what it means intuitively is the level of lifetime well-being that an additional person should experience to declare the new situation with the added person to be equally good to the original without that person. And the reason why this matters is there are some properties, and again, some undesirable properties that may be avoided by judicial use of this parameter value. We'll get to that later, but what it means essentially is you have to say something about what is a life worth living. But you can say